Watch this.
The state of our state is strong, stronger than ever before.
Governor Brad Little says the state has been doing the work and is enjoying the benefits because of it. But that doesn't mean there still isn't work to be done, as he outlines his plans for schools, taxpayers, and infrastructure.
But 2/3 is the threshold that the Republican State Central Committee would like to see for any initiative run in this state.
In a review of what they talked about in their winter meeting over the weekend, Idaho's GOP gave a preview of what we will likely see debated this legislative session. A big one has to do with what Idaho voters do outside of lawmaker purview. And just when you thought we wouldn't be getting any actual winter at all, we're about to get really wintry. Where we can measure snow in inches and where it will be measured in feet this week.
There's no need to change course, but we must raise the bar and never rest on our laurels. History may not remember our names and faces, but we have an opportunity while we're here to create a lasting legacy of good government.
It's working. Yes, the snow dance every Idahoan has been doing is working, but also what Idaho is doing is working, according to Governor Brad Little. That was the theme of his 6th State of the State and Budget address today. Whatever Idaho has been doing when it comes to our education, our economy, our future workforce, our tax relief, transportation, infrastructure, well, it's apparently working. And to talk about the bookends of that list, that'd be the education and infrastructure, a couple of other things in between, of course. Let's bring in Joe Paris and Andrew Bartline, who both, well, were there with a front row account of the speech and, of course, the response to it. So let's start with you, Joe, because the governor announced he wants to dedicate $2 billion to bring schools, Idaho schools, up to date.
Oh, yeah. And this is something that we've talked about at length. And here we're talking about the buildings and really the campuses across Idaho that really need to be shored up. There are buildings across the state, education buildings, that are literally falling apart. And over the last several years, lawmakers have worked into addressing it. So paying for the buildings and the maintenance, this is the big investment part, but it also knocks down the idea of having to run bonds and levies every single year so that they can pay for these infrastructure changes across Idaho communities, meaning that with the investment, you can actually also cut down on property taxes if you don't need those bonds and levies. But it's a big idea. How do GOP leaders feel about it? Well, looking back to at least last year, there's some important context for House Republicans. House Speaker Mike Moyle had this reaction to the big pitch from the governor.
House Bill 292, the one he vetoed last year, that's what we started. My concern is that under House Bill 292 model, we took care of the existing bonds, we took care of the supplementals before we allow them to go bond for buildings. I haven't seen the details in his bill to know what he's doing though, so I can't comment on that till we see, because it's really easy to say we're going to have $2 billion to do something, but are we putting more of our general fund or our sales tax revenues at risk? I just don't know without seeing the detail there. So we agree on the concept of helping build the buildings, but again, the devil's always in the detail, and we don't want to put ourselves in a position where we can't take care of all those other essential government services.
Speaker Moyle also pointing out a very key thing here. All the things that the governor pitched today, they're just proposal, they're just ideas. And so when you talk to lawmakers, oh, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? They haven't seen the fine details yet. So a lot of this is going to need to be fleshed out before we can hear what lawmakers think in terms of yes or no.
I can say really quickly, I know there's probably, if this was a question answer period during the State of the State, somebody say, what about the Idaho lottery and all the funds that were supposed to going toward buildings and stuff like that? Looking that up, it's less than $2 billion that they have given to Idaho schools from the time of its inception to last year. So this $2 billion would be basically doubling that to that point.
Yeah, and the money would also be over about 10 years. So
about
it wouldn't
10
just
years,
be an instant infusion there. Andrew?
Yeah, well, the Dems are certainly pleased to hear that. I mean, there's no complaints, right, when the governor is going to come in and invest in education. This is something they've pushed for as well. So they certainly see the value in this. And with the governor's address on education, making it a priority again, given his reputation, I don't think they're terribly surprised to hear about that. But the details are far from discouraging to make this $2 billion investment. The Dems actually say they're encouraged to make it now because they have concerns about spreading that investment over the decade, as Joe just mentioned. They say it lessens the impact. We speak with House Minority Leader Representative Ilana Rebel, and she says $1 billion is needed today, not a decade from now. And if we push this off, that problem's just going to get worse.
By 10 years, I think we'll have a lot more needed for repairs. I think the current $1 billion is probably going to balloon to significantly more than that. Plus, as a fast-growing state, we actually need new buildings. It's not enough to just fix the ones we have. At some point, we're going to need to build new buildings, new schools to address the growing population.
So certainly no complaints about the investment. They would like to see it more immediate, and half of that over the 10 years, well, they want it today.
Yeah, up to that point, as I mentioned, since 1990 to 2023, the Idaho Lottery's kicked in $2 billion, or just shy of that up to that point. Okay, so speaking of education, Governor Little mentioned in his State of the State speech today and in a tweet last week that Idaho went from the bottom 10 nationally to the top 10 for starting teacher pay, plus increased pay for teachers at all levels. Well, the governor's office said they got that data from the National Education Association because we wanted to confirm that. But the problem is we couldn't quite confirm that claim that Idaho went from the bottom 10 to the top 10 in starting teacher salaries because the NEA, the National Education Association, the data that they include on their website only includes up to the 2021-22 school year. We can confirm, though, that Idaho actually dropped to 51st that year from the year before for average teacher pay of public school teachers. So I guess any move from dead last is obviously a good one. So the other hot topic that always seems to be every time we get to these State of the States, infrastructure, right? Yeah. Bridges, roads, big topic every year. You've seen a lot of construction going on, not just in Boise, but around the state when it comes to this kind of stuff. Governor Little and the legislature, they've worked on these investments for transportation and infrastructure without raising taxes or fees, right? So can they finish this?
Yeah, and that's the real key here is that when they have these big, ideas about infrastructure that are supposed to go on for a decade, you have parts of the plan that you need to tick off every single box. So Governor Little is looking to add $200 million to improve the last 1/3 of dilapidated bridges in the state of Idaho. And they're also looking for $50 million to bond for another $800 million for what they say are badly needed transportation projects across the state of Idaho. Republicans like it. Major accomplishment, they think, should get done in terms of the bridges and the roads.
Absolutely. We made a commitment to do 3 tranches of $200 million each. We've done the first 2. The last one's as important as the first one. So yeah, I think we'll get there. And I'm pretty sure that will be one of the few that's not really debated. We all know that's important. Roads, we've spent a lot of money the last few years trying to bring up that infrastructure. And I know people get frustrated. I'm as frustrated as the rest of them with, having to move around and all the construction. But when it's done, it's such a wonderful thing that it's a good thing. So yeah, I think that one will be an easy sell there.
So a pretty big statement there from Speaker Moyle saying this is one of the few that probably won't be heavily debated.
Something tells me that's not the case. There's always some debate to these bills, and especially maybe even from the other side of the aisle.
Well, the debate from the other side of the aisle is they want more. Again, they like this idea. Okay. They're not going to fight them on it, but they'd like to see more pieces brought together. The Dems once again say the problem's bigger than their colleagues to the right are letting on. Rebell says the state's backlogged $8 billion for roads and bridges. I admit, I'm not sure where they got that number from. And yes, an investment to repair 1/3 of the most needed bridges is welcome from the left, but Rebell says that the state made their bed with tax cuts to the wealthy, while the conservatives are celebrating a state surplus. Rebell actually doesn't recognize it exists at all. She says it's a product of not paying your bills when they need to be paid. This infrastructure being an example of that with bridges and roads. And with that lost tax revenue, for example, it stops the state from making a larger, much-needed dent in our transportation needs.
The state has engaged in so many top margin income tax cuts in the last few years. They've cut over $2 billion in revenue. And so that's $2 billion we don't have to fix these roads and bridges. So it's a little frustrating to me that and the bulk of that money went to the wealthiest Idahoans in the state. Most of those cuts, very little money went to actual working people. Overwhelmingly, that money went to millionaires and wealthy corporations.
And I'm not sure if one of the two of you know this. I know there was a change to the income taxes not too long ago that had a piece with changing the corporate tax as well, kind of flattening the tax rate.
It was more of a flat tax, yeah.
And I think that's where that piece comes from. Again, she says it's a loss of $2 billion. Again, I'm not positive where these numbers are coming from, but big numbers.
Okay, something to keep an eye on as we get into the budgetary process. Something that made news last week, Idaho's abortion ban that kind of got the go-ahead from the U.S. Supreme Court. That's obviously something that's going to get readdressed, I think, that has been or needs to have been for the last couple of years in the Idaho State House.
Yeah, and that's something that I've heard talked about in the hallways of the legislature in terms of not really bringing new legislation, but kind of figuring out exactly how the existing legislation could be better operated on. So it's a good question, and we know that laws are still wrapped up in the court system, but there is an effort from House Republicans to address concerns and clarify the law. Here's House Majority Leader Megan Blanksma with a response to the question of, will there be more abortion legislation?
And I think, yes, we've had lots of meetings, quite a few meetings, tried to have meetings with pro-life groups and with physicians. And the one thing that we have identified, which I've discussed before, is that we want to make sure that physicians feel comfortable practicing in the state. We're just talking about standards of care. And so we're looking at what we can do for physician recruitment and retention, ongoing discussions, particularly with local hospitals, on how we can have that look. There's also other things around the trigger law that we've looked to support pregnant women, looked to beef up our foster care system, looked to make adoption easier in Idaho. So a real focus on families and Idaho families and what we can do to support them. And so, yes, it might not be what some people are thinking specifically, but yes, we're trying to work around that. You know, we don't want to lose our docs.
It's going to be an interesting conversation at the State House because you're trying to hit a moving target in the sense that this is moving through the legal system at the same time that lawmakers want to make those clarifications for the medical system. So it's a kind of left hand, right hand doing two things at the same time. We'll see kind of how it works out.
So the question is, do our OBGYN doctors feel safe operating in the state of Idaho? The Democratic side, they say not so much, right?
Yeah, that's really kind of the concern, right? They agree they want to keep doctors here in the state, and that's sort of public safety, public health might be a better way to word that. That's always been a priority. But with the elected officials, or the Dems, I should say, Representative Rebell says, you know, taglines might look good on paper. When you make the actual legislation, it might not look that sharp when those laws translate. So to say you're against like harmful, deadly drugs, including fentanyl, it's not exactly a controversial thing at all, but it looks different on paper.
By 10 years, I think we'll have a lot more needed for repairs. I think the current $1 billion is probably going to balloon to significantly more than that. Plus, as a fast-growing state, we actually need new buildings. It's not enough to just fix the ones we have. At some point, we're going to need to build new buildings, new schools to address the growing population.
Apologies there. I think there was a problem on my part on exporting a different video. What she was saying is talking about mandatory minimum laws, sticking with public safety, public health, to where fentanyl is something that certainly the Republicans, the governor, is against. I think everybody's against that.
Right, and it looks good on paper.
But then when you create a mandatory minimum law, the Democrats are concerned about somebody maybe not getting their due process right, somebody being rung up in jail for years when they wouldn't have to be proven to be trafficking that drug if you have a certain amount of it. So apologies there on exporting the wrong video, but that was the argument from the left on that.
All right. Well, so begins our, well, let's see, count them, maybe 3 months of looking at what's happening inside the Idaho State House for the next several months.
Lawmakers want to get out of there quickly, though, Brian, and a lot of them won't say the inside reason, but this is a campaign year. A lot of lawmakers want to get out of there so they can get ready to focus on the primary.
And some of them may want to have a badge of honor to take with them out on that campaign trail. So we'll see what happens when things really start to heat up. All right, thanks, you guys. Appreciate it. All right, day one of the 2024 legislative session, pretty much in the books. And as we mentioned, kicked off this afternoon with the State of the State, as you already know. What you may not know, though, is there was a sort of prologue held this weekend, which carried over to this morning. The Idaho GOP, the state's majority party, held its winter meeting Friday and Saturday at a church in Meridian, something we talked about last week. What the grassroots Republicans wanted to add to their party rules was to give a small group of people, the local district and central committees, the power to keep someone off the primary ballot. An elected Republican they found to not follow the party platform closely enough. Well, that rule recommendation was gutted, likely because they realized it would be too controlling and, oh yeah, probably illegal. So no banning people from the ballot, but the part where central and district committees can call Republican elected officials on the carpet for not being Republican enough, well, that was expanded with that rule to include county elected officials, not just the state elected officials. They also passed 8 of the 21 proposed resolutions. And there are many times these are more interesting than the party rules because the rules are generally just controlling how the party does its business, things in its own house, while the resolutions are what the majority party would like to put you under, potential laws under which Idaho citizens would be governed. And of the 8 that passed this past weekend, what Chairman Dorothy Moon called a guide for some of the legislators to understand what Republicans want to see addressed this session, the one at the top and the only one to get the stamp of approval from the State Central Committee was Resolution 2024-1. This would be a direct response to what is happening with an attempt at a voter initiative to open Idaho's primary elections. And during her legislative launch this morning, Chair Moon talked about how this resolution would surface this session.
This resolution, 2024, calls for a 2/3 majority vote.
Brought forth by the Bonneville County Central Committee, Resolution 2024-1 would change what it takes for Idaho voters to approve a ballot initiative.
You would think when we do an initiative in November of this coming year that it would have been a 2/3 majority vote. No, it's a 50% plus 1. And a lot of people think that's a pretty low threshold.
Senate Joint Resolution 101
Except
does one thing, actually.
Not enough people, at least those people on the House side of the People's House.
I've had an overwhelming number of calls and emails suggesting that I red light this 101.
And I believe the language in this legislation is flawed.
Seem to be in favor of changing thresholds when it comes to initiatives.
Change the initiative process requiring signatures from all of the election districts rather than from a select few.
Last session, when 29 lawmakers, mostly senators, wanted to increase the number of signatures needed to get a voter initiative on the ballot to make it more difficult.
Most of those have said that they'll lose their voice.
The House,
Has every member voted?
Voted it down.
39 ayes, 31 nays.
Ironically,
Has failed to pass the House.
they failed to get the 2/3 majority to make the change.
The second part in the whereas.
But should lawmakers fail to increase that voter threshold this session, well, the State Central Committee has a plan B.
The most favorable thing that would happen would allow that the legislature passes a constitutional amendment removing the initiative process in its entirety. So there's 2 parts to this resolution. Hopefully they'll go for the 2/3. If not, the steeper hurdle would be for a constitutional amendment change. Okay, so if they can't get 2/3 of the House to agree to require 2/3 of Idaho voters to pass an initiative, well, then they want to pass a constitutional amendment to get rid of the initiative process entirely. Leave citizens without any path to take an issue directly to the people. However, while amending Idaho's constitution would require 2/3 of both chambers to agree, an amendment only requires a simple majority of votes by the people to pass. So it appears the plan is to make a voter initiative, a law, more difficult to pass than a change to our state's founding document. Chair Moon said this morning Republican Senator Scott Herndon from Sagal has drafted legislation written already.
As you see outside, it's cleared up just a little for right now. We're not getting into the snow at this point, but we had some light snow showers earlier. All of you know that. And look at the traffic. Because of that, it's quite a bit of traffic out there heading out toward the interstate. Now, the next thing I want to show you here is the forecast for tomorrow. As you take a look at most of those temperatures around the Magic Valley, temperatures will be getting into the 30s. As you get up here to Sun Valley, it's mainly the upper 20s, and then to the western mountains, temperatures will be upper 20s. Down here in the valley tomorrow, kind of interesting thing that's taking place. You see the temperatures up to about 40 degrees. 39 is the high that I have for Boise, and a chance of rain and snow. Okay, so here's what's going on. Winter storm warning in this area in pink. So it takes up McCall, it takes up Sun Valley, Stanley. Then a winter weather advisory in blue, which includes Boise eastward, which made some gusty winds as well as some snow possible. And then right here for, I guess up here around Fairfield, you can see there's a blizzard warning from 11 o'clock tomorrow morning to 11 o'clock Wednesday morning. Then wind advisories out toward Twin Falls. Overall, travel is going to be really rough in the next couple of days. We'll have snow coming down, it'll be blowing sideways. Visibility in some areas, especially here, could be a whiteout. You may not see much of anything, but it could be pretty tough in some areas. I would advise be very, very careful with that. Think about the timing that you're going to be doing. If you don't have to, it's a different kind of a category because over the next couple of days, these storms are going to be coming in with wind. Boise, 3 to 5 inches of snow possible. You can see up here McCall, 12 to 18. 6 to 8 inches of snow in Fairfield. Now, just to talk about what's going to be taking place, if you look here at the Futurecast, we have some light snow for tonight, then it begins again, probably in the next hour, hour and a half. You'll see more snow coming in, but here's the heavier part, coming in overnight between about 2 to about 5 o'clock in the morning. And then after that, it'll break up for a while, but then we've got some rain-snow mix that moves in about the middle of the day, and then we see that we have another storm system for later tomorrow night. That moves in on Wednesday, brings more snow for the morning commute, especially for Thursday morning. So all these areas, each morning, be very careful about that. And tomorrow, we'll have a warm front about 10 to 11 o'clock in the morning. So it's snow overnight. We may even see a thunderstorm or an isolated shower during the day tomorrow, or rain-snow mix, then back to snow for later tomorrow night. And just to show you very briefly here, here's the break-in that we have for now, but we still have more snow that's definitely coming in from the west. There's plenty of that as you take a look out here to the west coast. So the 7-day forecast. We're just forecasting through Thursday right now, and we talk about all this snow. But then when you look at Friday, Saturday, Sunday, there should still be more snow that could be coming into the area. Starts to decrease on Sunday, and next week we're watching this closely. As we mentioned last week, we could be seeing some freezing air moving into the area from the upper Midwest, and that means very, very cold for next week, but drying up.
All right, State of the State always seems to spark a lot of comments like this one from Mi Chow, who says, Governor didn't talk about the doctors who are leaving our state. New doctors aren't coming in to take their place. Senate Majority Leader touched on keeping doctors. No clue how to do that. It's not just a shortage of OBGYN, but all specialties. New young doctors don't want to bring their families into the state with our draconian abortion laws and laws affecting trans kids. Could the changes to the initiatives affect the current open primaries initiative already in progress? Possibly, Carl, because here's what happens. If they pass a bill this legislative session, they can have an emergency clause, or even if it comes in July, then an initiative, if it passes and gets enough signatures and gets on the ballot for 2024, wouldn't be until November. So yes, it could possibly apply to that. Funding schools have always been a political topic, not a logical one. Moving school funding to the lottery was a diabolical attempt to get Idahoans to vote for the lottery. And guess what? It worked, says Jackie. Idaho needs to look at sports betting and the tax revenue. 33 states pick up several million a year, says Kelly. Another way to raise funds. Go ahead. Can we go ahead and say we're going to do away with grocery tax? I know we won't, but the legislature always says it will. It's always humorous, almost humorous, says Mark. And lastly, I'll leave you with this. It sounds like Idaho needs a third party. I'm probably not the only lifelong Republican who is done with the current party. That's from Kay in Weiser. We'll do it again tomorrow. See you then.